Grief is Loud, Workbook for Women, a recovery handbook for the raw, the real, and the loudly grieving. Author, Clara Winford. Thank you for being here. Whether you already have the Grief is Loud workbook, or you're just considering it as a tool to support your healing, I'm glad you're listening. I also want to remind you about a special bonus. The bonus chapter, your self-check-in. A simple but powerful tool to anchor you when everything feels like too much. No rules, no rush. Just one honest moment, made for the days that unravel you. You'll find the download link inside the book. Introduction. Before we begin, the truth about grief that no one tells you. There is no right way to grieve, but there are 1,000 wrong ways to silence it. I first heard this sentence from my mentor after I lost my child, and the only thing I regret is that I heard it too late, after months of ruining myself with forced smiles, pretending to be strong, and waiting for the next textbook stage of grief that never came. Years later, I became a professional grief mentor, guiding others through what once nearly broke me. But enough about me. My personal and professional experiences are here for one reason only, to bring you some kind of relief, so that you don't have to ruin yourself pretending, so that you don't have to wait, so that you don't waste the life that still exists after loss. Different, but still real. Let's start with this. If you picked up this book, there's a good chance you're not here for pretty words or perfect answers. You're here because something hurt you deeply enough to change how the world feels, how it moves, how it sees you, and how you see yourself. Maybe it was a sudden loss that cracked you open, or a slow goodbye that unraveled you piece by piece. Perhaps it was the grief no one acknowledged, of a friendship, a home, a version of yourself you'll never get back. Whatever it was, I'm not here to fix it. I'm not here to pat your hand and say, "It gets better." You've heard that already, and it didn't help. This book doesn't believe in moving on. It doesn't ask you to dress your grief in polite silence or inspirational quotes. It won't tell you that healing is a tidy upward slope, because healing isn't pretty. It's gritty, it's loud, it's human. Grief isn't linear. It doesn't come with closure. It doesn't always transform you into a softer, wiser, more grateful version of yourself. Sometimes it just shatters you. And that doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. You might not grow from this. You might just survive it. And survival, that's enough. This book doesn't try to make meaning out of your pain, unless you want to. It doesn't offer a 5-step solution, or pretend that grief can be solved like a math problem. What it offers is a flashlight in a hand, tools to walk through the dark, and someone whispering, "I've been there too." This isn't a manual for getting over it. It's a companion for moving through it, at your own speed, in your own way. There's no gold star for grieving quietly or gracefully. Here you're allowed to break things, to feel everything, to not know what you feel at all. You can scream, you can go numb, you can laugh inappropriately in the middle of crying. That's not brokenness. That's grief doing what grief does. So if you're tired of pretending you're okay, you're in the right place. If you're exhausted from being strong, you belong here. If you're done whispering your pain, welcome. Read this. If you're tired of whispering your pain, what we don't say stays louder. You've probably been quiet for too long, not because you wanted to be, because the world made it easier to stay silent than to say, "I'm not okay." Grief makes people uncomfortable. That's the truth, especially the kind that doesn't fit in a sympathy card or a socially acceptable timeline, especially when it's loud, when it sobs at stoplights, when it forgets how to form sentences at dinner, when it rages without explanation. So what happens? You shrink. You make yourself easier. You start editing your truth to keep others comfortable. And here's where it gets dangerous. You don't even realize you're doing it. You start believing that their discomfort is your responsibility. And in a way, it makes sense, because the human brain is wired to fear what doesn't fit. From an evolutionary perspective, behaviors that deviated from the norm used to signal danger, illness, instability, unpredictability. Our ancestors survived by sticking close to the group, by masking the weird, by rejecting the unfamiliar. The social brain today still plays by those outdated rules. So when you cry too long, talk too much about death, or simply stop smiling on command, people get nervous. Not because you're wrong, but because your truth disrupts the script. Psychologically, this is called normative discomfort, when emotional honesty challenges unspoken social rules, and most people would rather see you function than face their own fear of pain. But here's the trap. They avoid, and you perform. They flinch, and you shrink, which is backward. Because if anyone should be expected to stretch, to grow, to show up with more capacity, it's the ones watching, not the one breaking. You tell yourself, don't make it worse, don't ruin the mood, don't be too much. But here's what neuroscience and trauma research clearly shows. Emotional suppression doesn't make pain disappear. It embeds it. Studies in effective neuroscience, PANCSEP 2004, show that unexpressed emotions activate the brain's threat response, again and again. Gabor Mate writes that when we chronically suppress what we feel, the body registers it as danger. This leads to anxiety, depression, chronic illness, and dissociation. Bessel van der Kolk goes further. The body keeps the score. What you silence emotionally, your nervous system will scream later. So no, your silence isn't noble. It's costly. And the cruelest part? You've been taught to carry that cost quietly, while others get to look away. But grief is not your shame to hide. It's your story to speak. So let's turn the mirror, just once, toward them. It's not your job to make people comfortable with your pain. It's their job to grow more capable of witnessing it. It's not your job to meet their expectations. It's your right to have expectations, to be heard, seen, held, and not asked to shrink. You're not too much. You're grieving. Loudly, honestly, humanly. You don't owe anyone your silence, but you owe yourself your voice. Grief is Loud isn't just the title of this book. It's a truth I wish someone had handed me when I was drowning in mine. Grief is loud in your thoughts, in your dreams, in the way you can't focus, or can't rest, or can't figure out who you are now that the person you were grieving for, or because of, is gone. Loud grief doesn't mean dramatic. It means real. It means unfiltered. It means you're not pretending anymore. If you've been holding your breath just to get through the day, this is your reminder. You get to exhale. You get to tell the truth. Even if your voice trembles. Even if your truth is, I have no idea what I feel. Even if it's, I'm furious at the world and ashamed of it. There's room for all of it here. How to use this book. This book is not a checklist. There's no right way to go through it. You can read it cover to cover or skip to the chapter that calls you today. You can write in every handbook space or just sit with the questions in your mind. You can rip out the pages that hurt and tape back the ones that feel like truth. Each chapter gives you real talk, no sugarcoating, practical tools based on science, trauma research, CBT, attachment theory, and prompts that are doable even when you're exhausted or numb. You won't find any "just be positive" advice here. But you will find space, and space is sacred when your world has shrunk. Here's a moment just for you. Journal prompt. Set your intention. Why did I open this book today? What do I need? Even if I don't have words for it yet. What would it mean to grieve honestly, without apology? There are no wrong answers, just your truth. What you'll find, inside this book is structured in 4 parts, each one moving a little deeper, not into darkness, but into honesty. Part 1. The noise no one prepares you for what happens when grief hits like a freight train. Body, brain, and identity collapsing under the weight. Part 2. Calling it what it is. How to name what you're feeling, what you've lost, and what you've been told to hide, because language is power. Part 3. You don't have to heal pretty. Unlearning the performance of healing and finding what actually supports your survival. No shame, no timelines, just truth. Part 4. Becoming after the breaking. Who you are now and who you're becoming, not in spite of your grief, but with it. Each chapter meets you where you are. Each page holds space for your mess, your clarity, your numbness, your noise. You don't have to be ready. You just have to be here. Let's begin. Part 1. The noise. No one prepares you for when the pain is too big for silence. It felt like a bomb went off inside my chest, but everyone around me was just carrying on. The accident was over in seconds. One moment, we were driving home from the movies. Me, James, and our 10-year-old Eli. The next is metal folding into metal, a scream, glass, silence. I woke up in a hospital bed with a concussion and 3 cracked ribs. Eli didn't wake up at all. People say things like, "You're lucky to be alive." But I didn't feel lucky. I felt hollow, like the world had lost its gravity, and I was floating inside someone else's nightmare. Everyone around me moved on so quickly. The neighbors brought casseroles. My boss gave me a week off. My sister told me I'd get through it because I was strong. But I didn't want strength. I wanted my son. I didn't feel like I was in control of anything. My body, my mind, my reality. None of it felt mine anymore. The worst part wasn't the pain. It was the pretending. Pretending I was coping. Pretending I was functioning. Pretending I wasn't screaming inside every time someone said, "You'll be okay." When I finally spoke in the group, I said, "I feel like I exploded, but I'm the only one bleeding. Everyone else just wants me to get back to work and send polite texts. I can't scream at the grocery store, but I want to." And just like that, I stopped pretending. Lena, Group Trauma Meetup, December 2024. Chapter 1. This isn't just sadness. This is survival. We don't see things as they are. We see them as we are, especially in pain. CBT principle. Ready? This is where we stop minimizing and start mapping what's really happening inside you. And if you've made it to this page, thank you for choosing to stay with yourself and for being brave enough to keep reading, even when everything hurts. Because when your whole world shatters, your body feels it first. That's why, in this chapter, we focus on the body, on what grief does to your biology, and why your physical symptoms make perfect sense. In the next chapter, we'll explore what happens in your mind, the thoughts, contradictions, and chaos that try to make meaning where there is none. Grief doesn't just live in the heart, it lands in the mind, the muscles, the lungs, and the gut. When you're grieving, your body isn't just feeling sad, it's operating in full emergency mode. Not because you're overreacting, but because your system is trying to protect you. CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, tells us that thoughts, feelings, and physical sensations form a loop. In grief, that loop can go haywire. You think, I'll never feel normal again. You feel panic, tightness, dread. Your body reacts, racing heart, frozen muscles, sick stomach, and the loop spins. But here's the truth. None of this makes you weak. It makes you a body in mourning, a brain in survival, a human doing the most human thing, grieving. And while each person's grief looks different, there are patterns the body follows when it's trying to keep you alive. Do any of these feel familiar to you? Let's break it down. To make this real, here's what it can look like in people I've worked with. Case story. Nadia, 34, lost her sister in a sudden accident. She kept waking up at 4 a.m. with a pounding heart and nausea, convinced something terrible was about to happen. In therapy, we trace the loop. Intrusive thoughts. What if it happens again? Physical panic, racing thoughts, more fear. Using CBT, she began naming the thoughts as just that. Thoughts, not facts. That reframe allowed her body to begin de-escalating the alarm. Case story. Simone, 47, grieving her husband's loss after 20-year marriage. She reported clenching her jaw until it ached and snapping at co-workers for no reason. She believed she was failing at moving on. In our sessions, we unpack the underlying belief. If I feel the pain, it'll destroy me. CBT helped her challenge that thought gently, allowing moments of feeling instead of suppression. Her tension began to ease, not by fixing the grief, but by giving it a safe space. Grief may be inevitable, but the stories we attach to it, the meanings, the judgments, the silent shoulds, can be gently rewritten. That's where CBT comes in. It doesn't erase your grief, but it does hand you a pen. Grief in the body, a survival map. Grieving in the body is like walking with a broken rib. On the outside, you look okay, but every breath hurts. Brain foggy memory, disrupted attention, negative thought spirals, intrusive images or regrets. Body fatigue with no clear cause. Muscle tension, clenching, jaw pain, chest tightness or breathlessness. Digestive issues, nausea, constipation, diarrhea. Hypersensitivity to light, noise, or touch. Skin sensations, tingling, itching, numbness. Hormones and systems. Cortisol spikes, stress hormone. Dysregulated sleep cycles. Loss of appetite or compulsive eating. Sudden temperature changes, sweats or chills. Zebra zone. Other strange but common symptoms. Phantom sounds or smells related to the person you lost. Feeling detached from your body. Derealization. A sensation of pressure or internal buzzing. Prompt. Draw your own body scan check-in using the graphic below. These aren't overreactions, they're grief adaptations. They're your system trying to carry what feels uncarryable. So if you've ever thought, why can't I think straight? Why do I feel like I'm falling apart for no reason? Why am I exhausted by 10 a.m.? This is why. Grief pulls you into survival mode. And in survival mode, everything gets rewired to keep you going, not to help you thrive. But here's the gentle pivot. If you notice these things, you're already healing. Because awareness is the first crack in autopilot, the first breath, the first pause. CBT tells us that a thought is just a thought. A feeling is just a feeling. You are the observer, not the chaos. You are surviving, even when you don't feel like it, especially then. Prompt. List 3 survival mode symptoms you've judged in yourself. Now reframe them, not as failures, but as proof. You're still here. Chapter 2. You're not crazy. You're grieving loudly. Grief is not a disorder, a disease, or a sign of weakness. It is an emotional, physical, and spiritual necessity. The price you pay for love. The only cure for grief is to grieve. Earl Grolman. Let's get something straight. You're not too emotional, too angry, too numb, too checked out, too loud, too quiet, too dramatic, too cold, or whatever else you've been told. You're not crazy. You're grieving. And grief is chaos. Not metaphorical chaos. Actual neurological, hormonal, and behavioral chaos. Let's talk about that Kubler-Ross model for a minute. The 5 stages of grief. Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. Sound familiar? It's probably because it's been repeated like gospel. But it was never meant to be a checklist. And it definitely wasn't designed for people like you. People who are still trying to breathe through real, raw, daily pain. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross originally created her model for people facing death, not those living after it. Somewhere along the way it got flattened into a feel-good roadmap, a promise of closure, a tidy package for something inherently wild. But here's the truth. Grief isn't a staircase. It's a thunderstorm, a carousel, a riot, a fog, a freefall. A stillness is so loud, it deafens you. You can be angry one minute and grateful the next. You can laugh and feel guilty for laughing. You can feel nothing for weeks and then fall apart at the sight of someone wearing your person's favorite shoes. Grief doesn't move in straight lines. It loops. It doubles back. It gaslights you. We're not here to discredit Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. Her model opened doors that needed opening. It gave people a framework, a way to begin. But this book isn't about beginnings. It's about the middle of the storm. And if you picked up this book, chances are you're in that storm. Chances are the 5 tidy stages haven't matched the terrain of your grief. And that's okay. You're not doing it wrong. You just might be one of us. The ones whose grief doesn't stay in the lines. Let's try something else. Not for diagnosis. Just for honesty. Grief reality. Check. How much did you really feel the stages? This exercise requires a clear and cohesive visual layout, which is difficult to convey in audio format. I invite you to explore this incredibly helpful exercise in the pages of the book, Grief is Loud. No score, no rules. Just check what feels true. Then ask yourself, did your grief come in these shapes? Or did it arrive as something else entirely? Grief doesn't fit the model. It breaks the model. You might feel like you're making progress and then suddenly be back at square one because of a smell, a song, a dream. This doesn't mean you're unstable. It means you're human. Rage, numbness, obsession, withdrawal, apathy, longing, shame, confusion. None of them cancel each other out. They coexist. They stack. They pulse in and out like waves. Your nervous system is working overtime trying to make sense of the senseless. Your brain is processing a threat it can't solve. Your hormones are misfiring. Your sleep is broken. Your appetite is gone. Or suddenly ravenous. You can't focus. Or you hyperfixate. You start 5 tasks and finish none. This isn't a personality shift. This is your body's emergency response. In trauma-informed therapy, we learn that contradictory emotions are not a sign of disorder. They're a sign that something massive has just shattered the way your system usually works. And if you're wondering how this can be true, there's science behind it. According to neurobiological research, grief activates the same brain regions involved in physical pain. The anterior cingulate cortex and insula light up as if you've been physically injured. Your limbic system floods with stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. Trauma theorists like Bessel van der Kolk explain that when loss isn't processed in real time, the brain stores fragments of the experience, disconnected and disorganized, leading to emotional flashbacks, dissociation, or overwhelming responses to seemingly small triggers. You're not overreacting. Your brain is working overtime to keep you safe, even when the danger has already passed. You're not broken. Your biology is reacting to loss the only way it knows how, like it's trying to save your life. So when you wonder why you're angry and numb at the same time, why you miss someone and resent them in the same breath, why you want to scream but feel too exhausted to move, that's not a glitch. That's grief. Here's what that looks like in real life. From some of my clients in grief support groups. Case story. I was laughing at a meme on my phone while picking out my husband's urn. I remember thinking, what kind of monster am I? But I wasn't a monster. I was a widow in shock. Rosa, 3 days after loss. Laughter in the so-called denial stage. Case story. I went back to work 2 weeks after my son died. Everyone thought I was coping well. I wasn't. I was numb, frozen, bargaining with my brain to keep me from losing it completely. Devon, 2 weeks post-loss, functioning inside a shutdown state. Case story. I spent a month rage cleaning the garage at 3 a.m., blasting punk rock, and throwing out everything we ever owned together. Not crying, just furious. No one ever said that could be grief. Marianne, 7 months in. Rage in the silence of supposed acceptance. Case story. I rearranged all the books in my house by the color of the cover. I told myself it was about aesthetic healing. But I think I just needed to control something. Shelby, 6 weeks after loss. Case story. I baked 42 banana breads in 2 weeks. I don't even like banana bread. I just couldn't sit still. The oven became my therapist. Priya, 3 months post-loss. Let this be the place where none of it has to make sense. Let this be the page where you stop whispering even the strangest parts. Prompt. What have you felt that made you question your sanity? Write it. Let it be messy. Let it be contradictory. Let it be okay. Just when you think rage cleaning the garage at 3 a.m. is the weirdest coping mechanism out there, someone else will top it. The scale of grief craziness is vast and honestly, kind of beautiful in its absurdity. And now, let's name what rarely gets said out loud. Not all coping looks like lighting candles or journaling in a beautiful notebook. Sometimes it looks like binge-watching a show you barely like. Sometimes it looks like obsessing over the perfect toast texture. Sometimes it looks like yelling at your kitchen cabinets, or making spreadsheets, or rage cleaning until 3 a.m. Sometimes it's buying 7 different brands of shampoo just to feel like you've chosen something, or standing in your closet, whispering to a sweater they used to wear, or walking the same block 5 times because you forgot why you started, or suddenly needing to alphabetize your spice rack right now, or the universe might fall apart. Coping is not always graceful. It's often weird. It's often loud. But here's the thing. Weird coping is still coping. You're not failing because you're not meditating. You're surviving because you're doing something that grounds you, distracts you, or lets you feel in control for 5 minutes. Unpredictability isn't proof that you're broken. It's evidence that your inner world is trying to reorient itself around something that no longer exists. You're mapping a new reality. Of course, it's disjointed. If you find yourself acting in strange, inconsistent, or even irrational ways, don't assume you've lost your mind. Your mind is trying to save you. We've already explored that much in earlier chapters. Now let's go a little deeper. Cognitive behavioral theory and trauma neuroscience show that grief impacts your ability to regulate thought, emotion, and behavior. Your prefrontal cortex, responsible for focus and decision-making, can be temporarily overridden by the limbic system, your brain's survival center. This makes even simple tasks feel monumental and causes behaviors that seem unpredictable or illogical. You're not malfunctioning. You're adapting in real time to something your brain doesn't yet know how to hold. That's not madness. It's biology. So here's your next practice. Prompt: My grief compass, soothing versus sabotaging. Create 2 columns. Column 1, soothing, actually helps. List the activities, playlists, rituals, or even distractions that leave you feeling slightly more steady, connected, or understood. Column 2, sabotaging, feels good for a second but hurts later. List the habits or reactions that feel comforting in the moment, but leave you depleted, ashamed, or disconnected. This is not a moral list. This is a compassionate one. Some days, survival is messy, but naming what helps you cope well can be a powerful way to meet your own grief with intention. Let me end this chapter with a line I once saw scribbled on a bathroom wall at a grief center. Words that somehow said it all. Grief makes you weird. It's okay to be weird. Chapter 3. Smiling through it? That's the real mask. We turn grief into performance when we don't feel safe being seen in pain. Inspired by bell hooks and Brené Brown. Brené Brown has spent years researching vulnerability, shame, and the pressure to keep it together in public. She writes that vulnerability is the birthplace of connection, but society rewards the opposite: emotional control, pleasantness, and silence. Especially for women, the unspoken rule is to grieve quietly, or not at all. That's how the mask gets built. And bell hooks? Her name is intentionally written in lowercase, a choice she made to shift focus from identity to ideas. She taught us that emotional honesty is a radical act. Her work explores how race, gender, and power intersect with the expectation to suppress emotion. How society often rewards silence over truth, especially in women and caregivers. She reminded us that love and grief are deeply political, and that feeling fully is a form of resistance. So what happens when you live inside that silence? You make it to work, you answer the texts, you laugh when you need to, you even say, "I'm okay," and almost believe it, but let's tell the truth. That wasn't healing. That was surviving in costume. Society loves a tidy griever, the one who keeps showing up, the one who doesn't cry at the wrong time, the one who knows how to tuck it all in. Pain, panic, devastation, and still smile politely at the school gate or during a Zoom meeting. High-functioning grief is still grief, but it comes at a cost. We're taught from early on that some emotions make people uncomfortable, especially if you're a woman, a mother, or someone who's expected to hold it together for others. There's a cultural premium on resilience, but only the kind that looks photogenic, the kind that fits in an Instagram square, the kind that wears mascara and goes back to work after 3 days, the kind that smiles through pain and still packs school lunches. That brand of resilience is praised because it doesn't make others uncomfortable. It lets the world keep spinning without stopping to grieve with you. What we don't talk about is what it takes to fake your way through. The headaches, the stomach knots, the random chest tightness that creeps in during moments of silence, the quiet panic at 3 p.m. when you realize you haven't exhaled since breakfast. Case story. Alina, 39, a mother of 2, lost her father after a long illness. I went back to work after the funeral like nothing happened. I smiled. I cooked dinner. I played Legos with my son. And then, every night for 3 weeks, I stood in the shower and cried so hard I had to sit on the floor. But everyone kept saying, "You're so strong," like it was a compliment. Case story. Jade, 28, grieving a miscarriage. I didn't even tell my boss. I kept showing up, smiling through meetings, pretending I wasn't bleeding inside. The hardest part wasn't the loss. It was acting like it didn't happen. Masking grief doesn't protect you. It buries you. And when the pain gets buried, it doesn't vanish. It festers. Studies in the field of psychoneuroimmunology, a branch of science that explores how the mind and immune system interact, have shown that chronic emotional suppression can increase cortisol levels, weaken immune function, and heighten the risk of anxiety and depressive disorders. According to research published in journals like Psychological Science and the Journal of Behavioral Medicine, people who suppress emotions experience more physiological stress and report higher levels of fatigue, muscle tension, and insomnia. Your nervous system remembers what your mouth never says. Your body keeps score, even if no one else does. So maybe the question isn't, why am I still hurting? Maybe the question is, where has all my hurt been hiding? And why? You've worn the mask for a reason. Maybe it kept you from falling apart in front of people who didn't deserve your truth. Maybe it helped you survive a world that only applauds the polished parts of pain. Maybe it was taught to you, by family, by culture, by necessity. But here's your moment to ask, what are your reasons for the mask? Are they facts, or just old beliefs that deserve to be challenged? And if you're here, maybe you're ready to start taking it off. One breath, one page, one quiet, sacred truth at a time. You don't owe the world your composure. You owe yourself your truth. Prompts. What are your reasons for the mask? Are they facts, or just old beliefs that deserve to be challenged? What would your grief look like if you didn't need to hide it? Write it without editing. Let it speak. Let it breathe. Pause here and pass it on. If anything you've listened and read so far made you breathe a little easier, if you felt less alone for even a moment, please consider sharing it. Leaving a few honest words helps others recognize something real when they need it most. It also keeps this work, this voice, alive for those who are still searching. I'd love it if you shared your thoughts by leaving a review on the books page on Amazon. You'll find the link below this video. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to find this book. Part 2. Calling it what it is. Naming grief, guilt, shame, and all their sharp edges. Her name was Ruth. She was the first to speak that day. Her fingers were clenched around a cold coffee cup like it was the only thing tethering her to the room. "I lost my daughter 2 years ago," she said. And until this morning, I still hadn't said that sentence out loud. Not fully, not without softening it, not without saying something like, "We had a tragedy," or "She passed." Like if I used the real word, it would ruin the air around me. She paused, swallowed hard, then looked at the group and whispered, "She died." The room went so still you could hear the paper of someone's journal shift. "That's what happened. She died. I didn't lose her at the mall. She didn't wander off. She died. And I haven't been able to say that, because if I did, I was afraid it would destroy me, or destroy someone else who had to hear it." That day the group didn't fix her pain. They didn't rush in with affirmations. They just let the silence carry her sentence like something sacred. Chapter 4. Name the damn thing. I've been calling mine coping, but it's rage, pure rage that he chose to drive that night. You've made it through the part of this book that showed you what happens when the pain gets buried, how silence seeps into your muscles, how pretending rewires your nervous system, and how masking grief costs more than it protects. You've seen the toll. But I won't leave you there, not without offering what comes next. This next section is about healing and protection, not by shutting down again and again, but by speaking up, about learning how to defend your right to feel, to be witnessed, to not apologize for what still aches. And we begin exactly where healing starts, not with theory this time, not with research or neuroscience, but with a real story from the room, from someone who sat in a circle, held a notebook trembling in her lap, and spoke her truth. Because some truths don't need citations, they need witnesses. Let's join them. Today, I said, placing my own untouched coffee on the floor, we're going to name the monsters under our beds. It was the 3rd week of my Grief Without Apology workshop in Phoenix. A woman in the back, Sarah, whose husband had died suddenly, 9 months earlier, let out a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. I've been calling mine bad days. What if, I suggested, we stopped using euphemisms? What if bad days has an actual name? Sarah's eyes met mine, filling with tears. You mean, like saying I'm drowning in guilt because I was angry at him the morning he died? That I feel ashamed when I laugh now? Like I'm betraying him? That sometimes I'm not just sad. I'm furious at him for leaving. The room went still. Then the banker who'd lost his teenage son nodded slowly. I've been calling mine coping. But it's rage, pure rage that he chose to drive that night. One by one they began naming what had been haunting them. Not vague shadows of grief, but specific, jagged-edged emotions with distinct shapes and weights. By the session's end, the air felt different, heavier with truth, yet somehow more breathable. Naming it, Sarah whispered as people gathered their coats, makes it feel less like it's swallowing me whole. Grief experts have long told us that acknowledging loss is the first step toward healing. But acknowledgement isn't enough. To truly process grief, we must name it precisely, identify its components, trace its edges, examine its texture. Grief isn't just sadness. Loss isn't just missing someone. It's deeper. It's messier. It's the silent inventory of everything you're still carrying. But here's the thing. You can't release what you refuse to name. We live in a culture of euphemisms. We say someone passed away instead of died. We say we're managing instead of drowning. We say, I'm fine, when we're anything but. And every time we soften the truth for someone else's comfort, we betray our own. This isn't about intellectualizing grief or containing it with neat labels. It's about recognizing that grief isn't one emotion, but a constellation of experiences, each deserving acknowledgement. It's about developing a vocabulary that honors the complexity of what you're feeling, rather than diminishing it with platitudes or vague terms. That's why we need to explore why language matters so profoundly in grief work. The difference between saying, I'm struggling, versus naming the specific monsters. The guilt that gnaws at 3 a.m., the shame that floods when you feel momentary joy, the anger that burns hot and directionless, the profound loneliness that persists even in crowded rooms. When we name these emotions with precision, something shifts. The amorphous cloud of pain begins to take distinguishable shapes that can be addressed individually. The unnamed terror loses some of its power when dragged into the light and called by its true name. As we move through the chapters ahead, we'll practice naming all the sharp edges, not to blunt them, but to understand them. Because only by calling things what they truly are can we begin the messy, vital work of healing. You've been carrying these unnamed burdens long enough. It's time to know them by name. Naming is an act of reclamation. It says, this happened, this mattered, this hurt, and it's still here. What did you lose? Not just the person, but the rituals, the routines, the roles. Maybe you lost your identity as a partner, your imagined future, or your sense of safety. Maybe you lost your version of God, or hope, or your own reflection. Loss isn't always visible, but naming it makes it real. This chapter is just your invitation to lay it all out. The names, the roles, the pieces of you that fractured. Even the things you think shouldn't hurt as much as they do. Because they do, and they count. You don't need anyone else to validate what you lost, but you do need to name it if you want to stop carrying it in silence. Guided prompt. Map your invisible losses. Draw a circle in the center of a page and write the name of the person or event that triggered your grief. Then around that circle, name the hidden things you lost with them. Routines, roles, future plans, shared language, emotional safety, spiritual connection, your sense of time, your sense of self. Label each, no explanations, no edits. Just name the damn thing. Do you need help? Let's make this real. Below is a visual guide to help you practice. The example below is based on Claire, 36, who lost her father to a sudden heart attack. She didn't just lose him. She lost everything their relationship held. The routines, the emotional anchor, the parts of herself that only existed in his presence. These aren't just memories. These are ruptures. This is not poetry. This is inventory. Call each loss what it is, without cleaning it up. No filters, no euphemisms. Call it what it is. This exercise requires a clear and cohesive visual layout, which is difficult to convey in audio format. I invite you to explore this incredibly helpful exercise in the pages of the book, Grief is Loud. Take your time. Be ruthless. Be honest. This isn't about how it sounds to others. This is about setting the record straight. For you. Chapter 5. Grief isn't polite, so stop making it small. You don't have a right to the cards you believe you should have been dealt. You have an obligation to play the hell out of the ones you're holding. Cheryl Strayed. Tiny Beautiful Things. In Chapter 2, we looked at what happens inside your mind when you suppress grief. In Chapter 3, we traced how that suppression sinks into the body. And in Chapter 4, we learned how to finally call things what they are, to name your pain without flinching, without sugarcoating. You've seen what pretending does to your nervous system, your thoughts, your muscles. Now, it's time to talk about rebellion. Because despite what you've been told, grief doesn't always mean pain. It can mean contradiction. It can mean feeling nothing, or too much, or something you can't even name yet. Let's talk about not dramatic, non-public rebellion, but the quiet, personal kind that happens when you stop apologizing for your emotional truth. Because this next part of grief work, it's about confronting the lie that grief is always sad, soft, or sacred. That it comes wrapped in tears and silence. It doesn't. Sometimes grief shows up in rage, in jealousy, in relief, in ugly laughter, in numbness. And this chapter exists to say that all of that still counts as grief. You've already learned how to name your loss. Now it's time to let that name scream. Because grief doesn't sit with its legs crossed. It doesn't ask permission to speak. It doesn't wait until everyone's comfortable. Grief, real, loud, honest grief, is inconvenient, messy, and often deeply inappropriate. by society standards. And still, you feel it. This chapter is about every emotion you've tried to bury because it didn't fit someone else's timeline of acceptable mourning. The guilt for not crying enough, or for crying too much. The relief that the suffering is over. The rage at someone who's not here to defend themselves. The confusion that grief sometimes looks like numbness, or laughter, or silence. Grief doesn't come with a filter, and it doesn't owe anyone a polite performance. Case story. Layla, 33, lost her older sister to overdose. Everyone kept expecting me to break down, but I didn't. Not in front of them. I just kept thinking, you didn't know her like I did. You didn't see how hard it was to love her through the chaos. I felt relieved, and then I hated myself for feeling that way. But honestly, it was the first true thing I felt since she died. Case story. Dom, 46, lost his ex-husband. We weren't even talking when he passed, but the grief hit me like a truck. And then came the guilt. How do you mourn someone you were furious with when he died? And here's the thing. We often feel shame, not because our grief is wrong, but because we believe we're grieving incorrectly. You might feel guilty for not sobbing at the funeral, for getting out of bed too soon, or for not getting out at all. But that guilt, it often isn't rooted in your actual emotional experience. It's rooted in a learned belief that grief should look a certain way. It must be tidy, visible, and dramatic, but not too dramatic. That anything outside that imaginary box is wrong. This isn't about how you feel. It's about what the world tells you. Your feelings are supposed to look like. Let's name it. You don't feel guilty for not crying. You feel guilty because the world expects tears, and you didn't give it what it wanted. So, let's get honest. What if grief isn't meant to be digested but metabolized, not turned into something palatable, but felt fully so it can move through you? That includes the resentment, the relief, the secret wish you never said out loud, the anger that still shows up uninvited, the complicated love that doesn't disappear just because you're mad, the jealousy you feel when others still have what you lost, the numbness you're ashamed to admit feels easier than pain, the disgust at how people reacted, or didn't, the moment of joy that made you feel like a traitor, the indifference that creeps in when you're too exhausted to care. All of it gets a seat at the table, even if it makes someone else uncomfortable, especially then. Let's ground this in the science, too. CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, again, teaches us that thoughts shape feelings, and feelings shape behavior. But here's what grief does. It short-circuits that chain. It inserts contradictions like feeling love and hate at once, or laughing at a memory and sobbing 10 seconds later. Unprocessed guilt, regret, or rage. Those aren't just emotional. They become cognitive distortions. If we don't examine them, they metastasize. We begin to believe things like, I didn't grieve right. I'm a bad person for feeling relief. My grief doesn't count because I'm not crying. That's not truth. That's shame in disguise. CBT invites us to challenge these thoughts, not by denying the emotion, but by deconstructing the story behind it. Is it fact, or is it fear? Is it yours or inherited? In grief work, that means giving space for what we're told to suppress. Because as Dr. Pauline Boss, who coined the term ambiguous loss, reminds us, closure is a myth. We live with loss. We don't resolve it. So let's stop shrinking pain into something polite. Let's start listening to it instead. But let's also be clear. This isn't just emotional. This is cultural. There's a long history of grief being policed, especially when it's expressed by those expected to hold everything together. Women, Caregivers, queer people, people of color. Anthropologists and sociologists call this emotional normativity, the unspoken rules that dictate which emotions are welcome in public space and which are not. Sadness is fine as long as it's quiet. Anger, only if it's rational. Rage, relief, shame, tuck them in. You're making people uncomfortable. But what's polite isn't always what's true, and what's true often doesn't fit into polite. Let's say it clearly. Feeling relief that someone is no longer suffering doesn't mean you didn't love them. Feeling rage that they're gone doesn't make you ungrateful. Feeling jealous of someone else's simpler grief doesn't make you cruel. It makes you human. Prompt. Let your grief speak. Write a monologue for your grief. Give it a voice. No edits. No filters. No nice language. Start with, I am your grief, and here's what I need to say. Example. I am your grief, and here's what I need to say. You keep smiling at your coworkers like you didn't scream into your pillow at 2 a.m. You made a lasagna for the family gathering like your hands weren't shaking the whole time. You said you were fine when you haven't slept in 4 nights. You felt a flicker of relief the day after the funeral. But you swallowed it so fast, it left a burn in your throat. I know you. I know what you hide. And I'm not going anywhere until you stop hiding me like I'm a problem to fix. Let it be raw. Let it be messy. Let it be yours. Politeness won't save you. Truth will. Chapter 6. Say what you couldn't. If you're hearing this, I hope you know I stayed up nights writing conversations we never had. I replayed the last things we said, hoping to rewrite them with more grace. I carry all the words I never said. Not because I didn't mean them, but because I didn't get the chance. And maybe you'll never hear this, but I have to speak it anyway, because silence has been too heavy to hold. From a eulogy never delivered. Have you ever wondered how different a eulogy might sound if we didn't deliver it in front of others, but alone, one-on-one, with only the person we lost as our imagined witness? What would shift if we weren't performing grief but speaking it from the truest, rawest place inside us? Grief is strange like that. We write eulogies knowing we may never be heard by the one person who needs to hear them most. We speak to the air, to photos, to gravestones. We whisper into pillows. We say goodbye without knowing if it lands. This chapter is for those echoes, for the words that never came it into the room, for the conversations we keep having in our heads, hoping they still matter. By now you've let your grief be loud, messy, and human. You've started naming it, screaming it, giving it space. But what about the things that never got said? The words you rehearsed but never got to deliver? The apology you owed? The anger you swallowed? The questions that will never have answers? The truth you thought would destroy someone? The thank you that came too late? This chapter is about them. The things that still live inside you because they never had a place to go. And no, this isn't about tidy closure. This isn't a final chapter or a moral epilogue. This is about saying what you couldn't, because it still needs to be heard, even if only by you. Case story. Naomi, 41. She lost her mother in a slow, unraveling way, dementia stealing her piece by piece. I said goodbye 100 times, Naomi told our group. But never once did I say the thing I really meant. I was angry at her for not being the kind of mom I needed. I loved her, but I also resented her. And I never said it. Not once. Case story. Javi, 28th. His father collapsed in the kitchen on an ordinary Tuesday. They hadn't spoken in over a year. I was waiting for him to say something first, Javi admitted. waiting for an apology that would never come. After the funeral, the silence became unbearable. Not just his dad's absence, but the absence of closure, of that one final argument, of the truth neither of them ever said aloud. "I started waking up with chest pain," he said. "Until one night, I wrote the letter I never got to send. Not a kind one, just an honest one. And that night was the first time I slept." Case story. Elise, 54. Her daughter was born sleeping. People kept telling me to name her, to give her a place in the world. But I couldn't. I was too scared to love someone I didn't get to keep. I never told her I was sorry for that. I never told her I loved her. I still don't know how. Case story. Kamal, 38. He lost his mentor to suicide. I kept replaying our last conversation where I told him to hang in there. I thought I was being kind. After he died, that sentence felt like a punch. I never got to say what I really meant. That he saved me. That I didn't know how to save him. That I miss him every day. There's a psychological term called unfinished emotional business. It's the residue of unsaid truths and unexpressed emotions, the very things that keep us circling our pain instead of moving through it. But here's what most people miss. This doesn't only happen after death. It happens in everyday life. In the fight where you held your tongue because you didn't want to escalate things. In the apology you never gave because pride or fear got in the way. In the gratitude you felt but couldn't express before the moment passed. In the night, you turned away instead of saying, "I'm scared." These moments don't vanish. They build. They become emotional clutter. And when someone we love dies, they rush to the surface like an unpaid debt. Unfinished emotional business is everything left unsaid. Not just at the end, but in the middle, too. It's the invisible pressure that builds from moments you thought were too risky to speak into. Here's the practice I use with clients. Draw 2 columns. On the left, write, "Things I never said." On the right, "What I thought it would cost me." These aren't confessions to shame yourself with. They're keys to understanding your own silence. Because in moments of grief, or love, or fear, we make choices to protect ourselves and others. You didn't speak because you didn't want to cause pain, or because you were tired, or because you were trying to be kind or strong or simply survive. This practice isn't about regret. It's about context. It's here to remind you that you had reasons, that silence wasn't weakness. It was response. And now, from where you are today, you get to look again. Here's how that might look. Things I never said. "I'm still angry at you for leaving me like that. I needed more from you, even before you got sick. I was relieved when it was over. What I thought it would cost me. It would make me sound ungrateful or cruel. You'd feel like a failure. People would think I didn't care enough. Now it's your turn. Be honest. Be ruthless. One weight lifted is still weight gone. This isn't about rewriting history. It's about releasing the grip it still has on your chest. Because when we leave those truths unspoken, they don't disappear. They settle into our bodies, our behaviors, our beliefs about what we deserve. They live in the everyday moments where we stay quiet to avoid hurting someone, to protect ourselves, or because we were just too tired to face what needed to be said. And when someone dies, all of those silences come rushing back, asking for a voice. Unfinished emotional business, left unresolved, can manifest as chronic guilt, anger turned inward, or a sense of being stuck in grief without knowing why. We're not writing these letters to be poetic. We're writing them to be free. This chapter gives you the space to write it all, without grace, without apology, without anyone else reading it. Your job here isn't to forgive or to justify or to make peace. It's just to say what never got said. You can write to the person you lost. You can write to yourself. You can write to the people who disappeared after your loss. You can even write to the future you who needs to hear it. Prompt 1. Say the thing that still lives in your throat. Start with, I never said this to you, but... Prompt 2. Write to the version of you that survived. Start with, hey. I know we haven't really talked since it happened, but here's what I want to say. Prompt 3. Let the unsent words spill. Start with, if I could speak freely, without guilt or consequence, this is what I'd say. This chapter isn't asking you to send the letter. It's asking you to stop letting it rot inside you, to stop carrying the silence like it's your punishment, to give your grief somewhere to go. And maybe, just maybe, putting it in words is how you finally set it down. Part 3. You don't have to heal pretty. Real healing isn't clean. It's human. It's chaotic, gritty, and deeply personal. I found him in the parking lot after our group session, screaming into his steering wheel. Marcus, a 6'4" former military, whose wife died in childbirth along with their daughter 14 months earlier, had just spent an hour nodding politely while someone suggested journaling with gratitude as a healing practice. When he noticed me watching, he didn't apologize, just rolled down the window and said, if one more person tells me to find the fucking silver lining, I'm going to lose what's left of my mind. I leaned against his truck. Then don't. Don't what? Find the silver lining. Don't journal with gratitude. Don't meditate if it makes you want to punch walls. Don't forgive if you're not ready. Don't post inspirational sunrise photos if what you really want to do is scream into the void. His hands relaxed on the steering wheel. Everyone keeps waiting for me to put myself back together. As if you're supposed to reassemble into the exact same person, I said. Marcus wiped his face with his sleeve. Last week I got so angry I drove to the desert and smashed plates against rocks for 2 hours. Afterward I slept without nightmares for the first time in months. What kind of healing is that? The real kind, I told him. 3 months later, Marcus brought a box to group. Inside were shards of pottery he'd been collecting, pieces of the plates he'd shattered. He'd glued them into a jagged, imperfect sculpture. Not beautiful in any conventional sense. Edges still sharp enough to cut. It's not pretty, he said. But it's true. Chapter 7. The world wants you to get over it. Don't. I am not moving on from my grief. I am moving forward with it. There's a crucial difference. One suggests replacement, the other transformation. Dr. Joanne Cacciatore, bereaved mother and grief researcher. You're here, still reading, still carrying, still trying. And maybe for the first time, you're starting to suspect that healing isn't about fixing what broke, but learning how to walk with the pieces. After last chapters, you already know that our culture has developed a disturbing addiction to aestheticize suffering. Grief that photographs well for social media, healing journeys with carefully curated milestones, recovery stories wrapped in inspirational platitudes, and tied with a bow of everything happens for a reason. But real healing? It doesn't clock out at 5. It doesn't arrive on a timeline. It doesn't clean itself up for company. And it sure as hell doesn't look like forgetting. The following chapters will show you that real healing is ugly. It's snot-streaked faces and primal screams in parked cars. It's rage rooms and midnight breakdowns and saying the unsayable. It's surviving minutes when days feel impossible. It's regression and progression happening simultaneously. It's 2 steps forward and 16 back. It's finding bizarre coping mechanisms that make no sense to anyone else, but somehow keep you breathing. And it's gonna help you. I promise. You'll meet people who healed through methods no grief book recommended. The woman who processed her mother's death by learning to butcher whole animals, needing to understand anatomy and mortality through her hands. The widower who built elaborate Lego structures and then destroyed them over and over. The sister who wore her dead brother's work boots until they fell apart, then used the leather to make something new. You'll discover why healing journeys aren't linear paths, but chaotic spirals, why breakthrough moments often follow complete collapse, and why the most genuine recovery rarely looks like what we think healing should be. Most importantly, you'll be given permission, no, encouragement, to heal in whatever raw, primal, incomprehensible way your grief demands. Because healing isn't about looking whole to others. It's about finding ways to carry what broke you, jagged edges and all. 74% of Americans believe there's a normal time frame for grief, according to research from the Grief Recovery Institute. Most put this window between 3 months and 1 year. And then what? What magical transformation is supposed to occur when the allotted grieving period expires? Getting over it implies replacement, substituting absence with presence, pain with pleasure, longing with contentment. It suggests grief is something to conquer rather than incorporate. It treats loss as a temporary inconvenience rather than a permanent reconfiguration of your internal landscape. This myth has created generations of people who believe they're grieving wrong, because their pain doesn't observe society's timetable. It's created a culture where the bereaved feel pressured to perform recovery to make others comfortable. Dr. Catherine Shear, director of the Center for Complicated Grief at Columbia University, explains, "Grief is the form love takes when someone you love dies. The goal isn't to eliminate grief, but to find a way to live with it." What neuroscience reveals is even more fascinating. Using functional MRI technology, researchers have observed that grief physically changes the brain. The neural pathways formed through significant relationships don't simply disappear after loss. Instead, the brain undergoes a complex reorganization, integrating the absence into your ongoing neurobiology. In other words, your connection to what you've lost becomes built into the actual structure of your brain. Science confirms what grievers intuitively know. Some losses permanently alter you. Case stories. During a workshop in Seattle, I asked participants to create their own definitions of healing, without borrowing language from books, therapists, or conventional wisdom. Amelia, whose son died by suicide 7 years earlier, wrote, "Healing is learning to dance with my grief instead of being crushed beneath it." Marcus, 3 years into widowhood, wrote, "Healing is building a relationship with absence." Dahlia, a decade after losing her sister, offered, "Healing is integration, not erasure." Not one person defined healing as getting over their loss. Not one described healing as returning to who they were before. Instead, they spoke of incorporation, transformation, and coexistence. This is the vital shift I want you to consider. What if, instead of moving on from grief, we learn to move with it? Moving with grief means recognizing that your relationship with loss evolves rather than ends. Understanding that healing and hurting often happen simultaneously. Allowing grief to become a familiar companion rather than an enemy to defeat. Integrating loss into your identity without letting it consume you. Finding ways to honor connections rather than sever them. This isn't semantics. It's a radical reimagining of what healing means, one that aligns with both lived experience and current research. If there is no getting over it, what can you expect as years pass? The grief therapist Megan Devine often uses the metaphor of a boulder in a stream. Early grief is like a massive rock dropped into flowing water. It disrupts everything, creates chaos, blocks the natural course. Over time, the water doesn't remove the boulder. It reshapes itself around it. The boulder remains, but the water finds ways to continue flowing. That reshaping process is what we might call healing. You might notice the unpredictability of grief becomes more manageable. You learn your triggers and develop navigation strategies. The ratio of grief-dominated days to functioning days gradually shifts. You develop a broader emotional vocabulary around your loss. Memories bring simultaneous pain and comfort, rather than just pain. You discover ways to honor connections rather than sever them. Your identity expands to incorporate loss without being defined by it. None of this means you're over it. It means you're learning to carry it differently. Exercise. Reclaiming your definition. Society has been telling you how to grieve. The time has come to tell society to fuck off and reclaim your own definition of healing. Take a moment now to answer these questions. How do you define healing without using anyone else's language? What would healing look like if there were no timeline, no expectations from others, and no cultural pressure? What relationship do you want with your grief 1 year from now? 5 years? 20? What aspects of your grief do you actually want to preserve rather than eliminate? If your grief could speak directly to those rushing you to get over it, what would it say? The answers are yours alone. There is no wrong way to define healing if it serves your relationship with loss rather than others' comfort with your pain. Before closing this chapter, I need you to hear this. You do not have to get over your grief. You do not need to prove your healing by forgetting. You do not need to apologize for still feeling loss after others think you should be done. You do not need to pretend the person whose relationship, short future you lost doesn't matter anymore. If days or decades have passed and you still grieve, it doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're human. It means something mattered so much that its absence continues to matter. In the next chapter, we'll explore practical strategies for moving with grief, rather than trying to move beyond it. But for now, simply sit with this permission. Your grief doesn't need to disappear to be healthy. It just needs to find its proper place in the ongoing story of your life. And that story has no expiration date. Chapter 8. Build a fortress, not a persona. Boundaries are not walls to keep others out, but fences to keep yourself safe. They are not selfish demands, but necessary acts of self-preservation. In grief, they become your lifeline when the world wants to drag you under. Dr. Nedra Glover Tawwab, therapist and boundaries expert. Real stories stick with us longer than any advice or theory ever could. They embed themselves into our hearts and become reference points when we're lost in our own pain. Here's another story that changed how I understand boundaries, and might just change how you protect your own grief journey. And after this, I promise you're getting a hefty dose of purely practical, actionable strategies to support your healing process. Case stories. At my workshop in Portland in 2023, a woman in a black hoodie raised her hand and shared this. The first time I set a real boundary after my brother died, I was shaking. It was Thanksgiving, 3 months after. My aunt had called, voice bright with forced cheer, outlining the traditional family gathering, as if nothing had changed, as if his empty chair wouldn't be screaming at us all. "I can't come," I said, my voice barely audible. "But it's family," she insisted, Everyone's expecting you. It'll be good for you to get out." The trembling in my hands spread to my voice. I can't sit at that table and pretend to be thankful right now. "I'm sorry." Her silence was heavy with disappointment. Then, "Well, if you change your mind." I didn't change my mind. Instead, I spent that day alone with my grief, watching stupid movies my brother loved, eating takeout and crying when I needed to. It was terrible and necessary, and somehow healing. That wobbly no was my first step in learning what this chapter is all about. Grief requires fierce boundaries, and those boundaries are not selfish. They are survival. When you're grieving, the world becomes suddenly full of expectations, unsolicited advice, and demands on your emotional energy. People want you to grieve appropriately. They want access to your pain, but only in doses. They can handle it. They want you to recover on their timeline. These expectations come from everywhere. Family members insisting you participate in holidays or gatherings. Co-workers assuming you're back to normal after your bereavement leave. Friends who need you to reassure them that you're doing better. Social media algorithms pushing memory posts about your loved one. Complete strangers offering platitudes when you least expect them. Cultural narratives about moving on and closure. Without clear boundaries, these forces will sweep you away from your authentic grief process. They will exhaust your limited emotional resources. They will make healing nearly impossible. The hard truth: people will rarely understand your grief boundaries unless you enforce them consistently and unapologetically. Remember our crucial shift from the previous chapter? We're no longer trying to get over grief. We're learning to move with it. Boundaries are how we create the conditions that make moving with grief possible. Think of boundaries as the container that holds your grief safely, allowing it to transform at its own pace rather than under external pressure. They provide space for your emotions to unfold without judgment, protection from well-meaning but harmful interventions, control over how and when you engage with triggering situations, permission to prioritize your needs while grieving, the structure that helps you navigate a world that keeps spinning despite your loss. When you set grief boundaries, you're not being difficult or antisocial. You're creating the necessary conditions for authentic healing. Let me introduce you 4 essential grief boundaries. Social boundaries, controlling who gets access and when. Your emotional energy is a precious, limited resource when grieving. You get to decide who deserves access to it. Practical strategies create tiers of communication: inner circle, occasional check-ins, updates only. Script responses for unwanted invitations. I appreciate the invitation, but I'm not ready for social gatherings yet. Designate a buffer person who can run interference with well-meaning but draining people. Practice saying, "I need to leave now," or "I need to be alone," without justification. Case story. Marta, whose partner died suddenly, created a Google Calendar for friends to sign up for specific help: meal delivery, dog walking, but also blocked off no-contact days when she needed complete solitude. 2. Emotional boundaries, protecting your internal landscape. Grief makes you vulnerable. Your emotional defenses are compromised. You need clear agreements, with yourself and others, about what you can handle. Practical strategies identify emotional triggers and create plans for encountering them. Give yourself permission to change the subject when conversations become too painful. Name your emotions without apology. I'm angry today, and I don't need solutions. Refuse to perform recovery to make others comfortable. Recognize when others are using your grief for their own emotional needs. Case story. James, grieving his child, kept a card in his wallet that read, "I may need to step away suddenly. This isn't about you. I'll return when I can." He would silently hand it to people when he felt overwhelmed. 3. Digital boundaries. Managing grief in a connected world. Our digital environments can become minefields of unexpected triggers when we're grieving. From social media memories to email marketing celebrating Mother's Day when your mother just died, technology requires specific boundaries. Practical strategies. Audit and adjust social media settings to control memories, tags, and algorithms. Create separate email accounts for grief-related communications. Use technology tools to limit when and how you receive notifications. Consider digital memorials or spaces that you control, rather than being subjected to others' public grief expressions. Block, mute, or restrict people whose digital presence complicates your grief. Case story. After her miscarriage, Elena used browser extensions to filter out baby-related content, set up autoresponders explaining her limited availability, and created specific digital grief time when she would engage with online support groups. 4. Time boundaries. Grief moves at its own pace. Perhaps the most important boundary of all is protecting your grief from the tyranny of other people's timelines. Practical strategies. Explicitly communicate your need for timeline flexibility to employers and institutions. Build buffer time into your schedule for unexpected grief waves. Create a standard response for the "aren't you over it yet?" questions. Recognize anniversary reactions and plan accordingly. Give yourself permission to measure progress differently. Case story. Sam, whose brother died by suicide, built what he called grief windows into his weekly schedule. Specific times when he allowed grief its full expression rather than fighting unexpected waves during important meetings or events. And then there's one more part of boundaries we can't skip. The part that requires learning to say no. Clearly, kindly, relentlessly. Saying no while grieving requires a particular skill set. Here's how to make your no both kind and immovable. Make it clear. No, I won't be attending the holiday gathering. Keep it simple. No justifications or lengthy explanations are needed. Remove guilt language. Strike, "I'm sorry, but," from your vocabulary. Offer alternatives if you want to. "I can't do that, but I could try this instead." Repeat as necessary. "I understand you're disappointed, but my decision stands." Remember, every time you say no to something that would deplete your emotional resources, you're saying yes to your own healing. Prompts your grief boundary blueprint. This exercise requires a clear and cohesive visual layout, which is difficult to convey in audio format. I invite you to explore this incredibly helpful prompt in the pages of the book, Grief is Loud. Setting grief boundaries isn't just about saying no. It's about saying yes to the messy, non-linear, deeply personal journey of moving with your grief, rather than beyond it. When you protect your grief process with clear boundaries, you're not being selfish. You're creating the conditions necessary for genuine healing, the kind that honors your loss, rather than erasing it, that transforms pain into meaningful integration rather than toxic denial. For now, remember, your grief, your boundaries, your rules, and anyone who can't respect that doesn't deserve access to your heart while it's healing. In the next chapter, we'll explore how to find your grief community. People who respect your boundaries while providing the specific support you actually need, not what they think you should want. Chapter 9. Finding your grief tribe. After my son died, my lifelong friends disappeared while strangers who'd survived similar losses showed up with exactly what I needed. Not flowers, not casseroles. but the simple acknowledgement that this pain might kill me. And if it didn't, they'd be there when I was ready to live again. Jason Green, author and bereaved parent. You were never meant to grieve alone. Even in your most isolated moments, others walk similar paths. Your job isn't to find people who can fix your grief. It's to find those who will witness it without turning away. Let me tell you the brutal truth about grief support. The people you expect to be there often won't be. At least not in the ways you actually need. Your sister, who calls daily, might flood you with toxic positivity. Your best friend since childhood might disappear entirely. Your co-workers might avoid eye contact in the break room. Your partner might try to rush your healing to ease their own discomfort. This isn't because they're terrible people. It's because grief terrifies the uninitiated. It reminds them of their own fragility. It demands a kind of authentic presence most people have never practiced. Meanwhile, unlikely allies emerge from unexpected corners. The distant acquaintance who survived a similar loss. The neighbor who simply sits in silence without trying to fix you. The online stranger whose message somehow sees right through to your core. Building your grief tribe isn't about gathering the people who love you most. It's about finding the people who can hold space for your particular brand of brokenness without flinching. Not all support is created equal. When someone asks, "How can I help?" most grievers don't know what to request because they've never navigated this territory before. There are several levels of grief support responding to what you actually need. Let's get specific about what meaningful grief support actually looks like. 1. Witness support. These people simply acknowledge your pain without trying to fix it. They say, "This is awful," instead of, "It will get better." They sit with you in the darkness, rather than dragging you toward false light. What it sounds like, "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. This is terrible, and I'm not trying to make it better." 2. Practical support. These people handle the mechanics of life when you can barely function. They don't ask, "Let me know if you need anything." They say, "I'm doing your laundry on Tuesday. Leave it outside your door." What it looks like: meal coordination, child care, pet care, bill management, house cleaning, errand running, appointment driving. 3. Informational support. These people help you navigate systems you never wanted to learn about. Funeral arrangements, death certificates, estate matters, grief resources, and support groups. What if it sounds like, "I researched some grief groups in your area. Here's a list of meeting times. I can go with you to the first one if you want." 4. Emotional processing support. These rare individuals create space for your raw, uncensored emotional expression without becoming overwhelmed. What it looks like: active listening without advice, giving, validating your right to feel whatever you're feeling, normalizing grief responses that society pathologizes. 5. Continuing connection support. These people don't expect you to move on. They recognize special dates, mention your person's name, and understand that 5 years from now, you might still need to talk about your loss. What it sounds like: "I was thinking about Sarah today. Want to share a memory of her?" Or, "Your dad's birthday is coming up. Do you want company or space that day?" Most people in your life can only provide 1 or 2 types of support. Your job isn't to force them into roles they can't fill. It's to build a diversified grief portfolio with different people serving different needs. Are you wondering just now where to find these, your grief people? Or going further, such grief-specific support groups? Believe me, there's something uniquely powerful about sitting in a room with people who just know. No explanations are needed. No well-meaning but clueless comments. It's just a raw, authentic presence, with others who get it. Types of groups to consider. Loss, specific groups. Suicide loss, child loss, partner loss. Demographic specific groups. Young widows, bereaved parents, LGBTQ+ grief. Approach specific groups. Religious, spiritual, secular, creative expression. How to find them. Local hospices. Most offer free community bereavement services. Community mental health centers. Places of worship. Online directories like GriefShare or the Compassionate Friends. Social media search terms. Grief group. Your location/type of loss. What to expect. Most groups have a facilitator who guides the discussion and ensures safety. Some follow structured formats while others are more free-flowing. Give any group at least 3 tries before deciding if it's right for you. The first meeting is always awkward. What about online communities? For every type of loss, there's a digital community of people experiencing something similar. These spaces can provide around-the-clock support when traditional resources are closed or inaccessible. Where to look? Facebook private groups. Search your specific loss type. Reddit communities like r/grief support or loss-specific subreddits. Grief-focused apps like Grief, Support and Community, or Empathy. Moderated forums on grief organization websites. Don't forget to make a reality check as well. Online communities can be lifelines, but they come with risks. Some promote unhealthy grief myths or lack proper moderation. Look for groups with clear guidelines, active moderators, and a focus on support rather than comparison of suffering. What about helping yourself with professional support? Sometimes peer support isn't enough. Grief can trigger or exacerbate mental health conditions, create complicated grief responses, or simply require more specialized guidance. Options to consider. Grief counselors/therapists. Look for those with specific grief training. Grief coaches. Spiritual advisors with grief expertise. Psychiatric support if grief triggers depression, anxiety, PTSD. Don't be afraid to ask potential providers. What's your approach to grief work? Red flags include those who emphasize closure, promise to fix your grief, or seem uncomfortable with intense emotion. The right professional won't try to cure your grief, but will help you build the capacity to carry it. Be open to surprise. Sometimes the person who truly gets your grief is the barista who notices your sad eyes, the delivery person who shares their own loss story, or the colleague who simply says, "This must be so hard," instead of "stay strong." Be ready for unexpected connections. Some of the most profound grief support comes from places you'd never expect. Places to explore. Creative workshops for grievers. Writing, art, music. Physical outlets with grief components. Yoga for grief. Hiking groups. Volunteer opportunities with grief organizations. Memorial events where you might meet others with similar losses. And how to deal with the people around you while you're grieving. Let's be honest, most of us were never taught how to ask for help. Not in grief, not in anything. We learned how to cope quietly, how to be strong, how to not be a burden. So when grief hits, and you actually need things, from emotional presence to someone taking your kids for the afternoon, saying it out loud feels awkward, maybe even shameful. That's the first grief barrier we break here. Here's the catch. Even the most well-intentioned supporters can't read your mind. You need a vocabulary for articulating what you actually need, something most of us never learned. Forget subtlety. Adapt the direct approach. Grief requires brutal clarity. I don't need advice right now. I just need you to listen. Please don't tell me it's going to be okay. Just sit with me. I need practical help with the specific task, by specific time. I'd appreciate if you'd check in weekly by text, but I may not always respond. Please say loved one's name out loud. I need to hear it. I know you want to help me through this. Here's what actually helps. I appreciate your support. Can we talk about what that might look like? You can get better at saying what you need. You can even say it with clarity and confidence. But here's the thing. Even when you do communicate well, not everyone will respond the way you hope. That's the second grief barrier no one warns you about. Not the asking, but the disappointment that follows when people still get it wrong. Some support helps you breathe. Some support steals your air. And when you're already carrying the weight of your grief, you don't need to carry the weight of other people's inability to show up for you too. Learn to identify these red flags and those who make your grief about their discomfort. It's hard to see you like this. Use your tragedy to process their own issues. This makes me realize how precious life is. Impose timelines. Aren't you feeling better yet? Offer spiritual bypassing. Everything happens for a reason. Compare suffering. At least they didn't suffer like my uncle did. Demand emotional labor. Tell me exactly what happened. What about the heaviest weight of disappointment connected with your closest people? Let me tell you a story. A woman wrote to me after losing her sister. In the days after the funeral, her best friend of 20 years never called. Not once. When she finally reached out weeks later, the friend said, "I just didn't know what to say. I thought maybe you needed space." She didn't. She needed her. And that silence, unintentional as it was, became a deeper kind of pain. The hardest grief lesson. Sometimes those closest to you simply cannot show up the way you need. This creates a secondary loss on top of your primary grief. You have options. Adjust your expectations. This person can provide X, but not Y. Communicate specific, manageable requests. Find additional support for needs they can't meet. Take space when necessary. Consider whether temporary or permanent distance is needed. Remember, you're not obligated to maintain relationships that consistently harm your healing process, even with family. Your priority is survival, not protecting others from the consequences of their inability to support you. And before we close this chapter, there's one more piece of healing in the community that deserves your attention. Do you already know a strange grief paradox? Sometimes, supporting others who understand your pain can replenish you. Many bereaved people find unexpected healing in mutual aid. Grief can feel like treading water in the dark. When you find someone swimming beside you, it can save you both. But you can't pull others to shore if you're too tired to float. Learn the difference between shared strength and silent drowning. When mutual support works, it creates a beautiful exchange where both people feel seen. When it doesn't, it creates further trauma. Know the difference. Exercise your grief tribe map. Grief can make you feel like no one gets it. But what if you looked again, with intention? Take a moment, get still, grab a pen. 1. Who's here for you, really? List the people who have shown up for you since your loss. Anyone who's reached out, helped, listened, or even just sat in silence. Now ask yourself, what kind of support did they offer? Emotional, practical, witness, informational, continued connection. Did that support feel nourishing or draining? This exercise requires a clear and cohesive visual layout, which is difficult to convey in audio format. I invite you to explore this incredibly helpful exercise in the pages of the book, Grief is Loud. 2. Who's missing, and why does it hurt? List the names of people you expected to show up, but didn't. Next to each name, write what you wish they'd done or said. Then ask, is this someone I want to educate, forgive, distance from, or simply grieve? Part 4. Becoming after the breaking. Reclaiming who you are without erasing what you lost. In the first months after I lost my husband, I felt like a ghost in my own life. I couldn't eat, couldn't laugh, couldn't answer texts that said, "How are you holding up?" Because even that required a version of me I didn't have access to. I wanted the old me back, the one who made weekend plans, who remembered birthdays, who could walk past the frozen food aisle without having a full-body reaction. So I tried to pretend I was still her. I wore her jeans. I smiled her smile. I answered emails like she would have. I even tried going back to yoga, hoping my body might remember joy before my mind could. But nothing fit. Not my clothes, not my routines, not my name when someone said it out loud. The breakdown didn't happen at night or in therapy. It happened in Target. I was in the cereal aisle holding 2 boxes, frozen in place because I couldn't remember which one he liked. My throat closed. My knees buckled. A stranger walked by and said, "Excuse me," and I jumped like I'd been shot. I left the cart, walked to my car, and sobbed into a reusable bag like it was a confessional booth. That night, I didn't light a candle for him. I lit one for me. Not to remember who I was, but to begin meeting whoever I was becoming. I'm not who I was before, but I'm still here, becoming. Not broken. Maya, 18 months after loss. This part of the book isn't about how to get back to who you were. It's about meeting who you're becoming. And no, you don't have to like her yet. You don't have to recognize her. But she's here now. You're here now. And that means there's still something to live into. In the chapters ahead, we'll explore how grief reshapes your identity. Not just in the big, life-altering ways, but in the small daily shifts. How you speak, who you trust, what you value, what you no longer tolerate. You'll find that some parts of you stay, some stretch, some shatter, some get sharper. You don't have to be who you were before. And maybe, eventually, you won't want to be. Perhaps the butterfly is proof that you can go through a great deal of darkness and still become something beautiful. Bo Taplin, Chapter 10. You don't have to be who you were before. Sometimes we find our true selves not in who we were, but in who we become after the fire. Anonymous Survivor. There's a strange kind of grief that wraps itself around your identity after loss. It doesn't scream like the grief of that first phone call, that first empty bed, that first aching silence. No. This one whispers. Quietly, constantly, it whispers, "Who are you now?" And it's relentless. You used to know. You used to be sure. Before the loss, your reflection made sense. The roles you played, the habits you held, the dreams you were chasing. They all fit together like a carefully stacked tower of self. But then loss kicked it all to the ground. And now, you're standing in the ruins, trying to remember how to build again. Here's the thing no one tells you. You don't have to rebuild the same tower. You are not obligated to return to who you were before. In fact, you can't. Not really. Because loss changes you. It stretches your soul, alters your rhythm, carves deep wells into your inner landscape. That doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're becoming. But becoming what? That's the scary part, isn't it? Grief forces change on you without permission. You didn't choose this pain or the pieces it left behind. And now you find yourself facing a version of you that doesn't feel familiar. These might look like big changes, but most of the time the big ones begin with a series of small ones, subtle shifts that maybe only you notice and feel. Maybe you don't laugh the way you used to. Maybe small talk makes you impatient. Maybe you feel sharper, softer, louder, quieter. You feel different, and that difference can feel like betrayal, like you're letting someone down by moving on, changing, adapting. But hear this. It is not a betrayal to grow. It is not disloyal to survive. And this isn't just something you've noticed about yourself. It's grounded in science. Psychological research on post-traumatic growth and identity reconstruction shows that significant loss often prompts an identity shift. According to studies in the field of trauma psychology, especially the work of scholars like Dan McAdams and Crystal Park, our narrative identity, the internalized story we tell about who we are, can be deeply disrupted by grief. But this disruption can also open the door for writing that story again. People who experience traumatic loss often report long-term shifts in their values, relationships, and sense of purpose. This doesn't make the loss worth it, but it does show that our sense of self is not static. It's responsive, it's adaptive, and in times of deep sorrow, it begins to reshape itself around what we've lived through. Case stories. I met one of these women during a grief journaling retreat I co-led in the quiet outskirts of New Orleans. She had been silent most of the weekend, her pain sitting just beneath the surface. But when she spoke, her voice was steady. I used to be the planner, the fixer, the strong one. But now I'm the one who pauses, who listens, who sits with pain, without needing to fix it. Another one shared, after losing my brother, I stopped returning calls out of obligation. I used to be available to everyone all the time. Now, I protect my space like my life depends on it. Because it kind of does. That boundary wasn't just survival. It was the beginning of healing. I remember the shift happening during the workshop. Sitting in that circle of women, I realized I didn't have to explain myself to belong. That was the first time I felt safe saying no. These stories aren't exceptions. They're examples of the quiet revolutions that happen inside us, even when the world can't see them. There's no honor in staying stuck just to preserve a version of yourself that can't breathe anymore. The you before the loss mattered. She still does. But she doesn't have to be the blueprint. You're allowed to grieve her too, and you're allowed to outgrow her. If grief has given you anything, and let's be honest, it's mostly taken, it has given you access to a depth you might never have touched otherwise. You see the world differently now. You see people more clearly. You recognize hurt where others might miss it. You've become the kind of person who can sit with discomfort, who doesn't look away from suffering. That matters. But it also comes with tension. People might still treat you like you're the same. They might expect you to bounce back, rejoin the world unchanged, and perform your old life like a play you know by heart. And maybe you try. Maybe you smile through clenched teeth. Maybe you accept invitations that drain you. Maybe you feel like you're pretending. Because you are. You're trying to live a life that no longer fits. What if instead you gave yourself permission to change? Not just in the obvious ways, like routines, responsibilities, and social circles, but deeper, at the level of values, desires, the way you love, the things you tolerate, the things you fight for. What if you started asking, not, how do I get back to who I was? But, who am I becoming now that I didn't choose this? That's the journaling prompt for this chapter. It's a tender, complicated question, but it deserves time. Prompt. Who am I becoming now that I didn't choose this? Maybe the answer comes in fragments. Maybe it shifts every day. That's okay. This isn't about rushing to the finish line. There is no arrival. There is only unfolding. And unfolding takes time. You are not a puzzle to solve. You are a person in the process. Let yourself evolve. Let yourself surprise you. You might find that the you emerging from this grief is more honest, more tender, less tolerant of shallow connections, and more drawn to quiet truths. You might become the person who cries openly, who says no more often, who stops apologizing for her needs. You might discover parts of yourself you never had access to before. Strength, softness, rage, courage, clarity. These aren't flaws or detours. They are your becoming. It is okay if you don't know who you are right now. It is okay if your sense of self feels like a stranger. That's not failure. That's the wilderness. And the wilderness, hard as it is where transformation happens. No map, no clear path, just you, and the next step, and the next. Trust that the you who is coming is just as real, just as worthy, just as sacred as the one you lost. And maybe, just maybe, she carries the strength of both. Reflective practice. Write a letter to the version of you before the loss. Tell her what you miss, what you're proud of, what you're carrying forward. Now write a letter to the you who is becoming. Tell her what you hope, what you fear, what you're beginning to love. This is not a goodbye to who you were. This is a welcome to who you are becoming. And she's worth knowing. Chapter 11. Letting go doesn't mean forgetting. You may forget the way they laughed, the exact color of their eyes, or what they said on that one perfect afternoon. That doesn't mean you failed them. According to cognitive behavioral therapy and neuroscience, memory isn't a vault. It's a living process. To forget is not to stop loving. It's to be human. From trauma-informed therapeutic practice and cognitive memory science, becoming someone new, as we explored in the last chapter, sometimes means remembering less. Not because we want to, but because becoming often reshapes what stays clear and what fades into softness. We live in a culture that treats grief like a to-do list item, something to check off and put behind you. There's a quiet, polite pressure to move on, to find closure, to let go. And when memory begins to fade, the guilt creeps in. If I can't remember everything, does that mean I'm letting them go too soon? But here's the truth. Letting go doesn't mean forgetting, and healing isn't a betrayal of memory. If anything, real healing often requires us to remember deeper, clearer, more intentionally. Not with pain as the anchor, but with reverence, with choice. You don't forget someone you loved with your whole body. You don't erase the sound of their laugh, the shape of their presence, the invisible ways they once filled a room. Memory clings, but not always in pain. Sometimes it becomes soft, sacred, a kind of ritual all its own. And grief? Grief doesn't ask you to let go of them. It asks you to let go of the version of life where they were still here. That's not forgetting, that's adapting. That's love, reshaped. There are days when memory sneaks up on you. A song, a smell, a street corner. And suddenly, you're back in a moment that no longer exists in the present tense. That can feel like a gut punch. But it can also be a quiet kind of visit. A way to hold them close again, even if just for a heartbeat. And you get to choose how you carry them. It's also worth saying this. Memory fades, even the ones we want to keep most. The sound of their voice might blur, and the details of a day together might feel like water through your fingers. That doesn't mean you're forgetting them. It means you're human. Neuroscience confirms that memory is not a perfect recording. It's a reconstruction, and over time those reconstructions can soften or shift. This isn't a failure of love. It's the brain's way of helping us survive. Please don't shame yourself for what you can't recall. You remember in the ways that matter. The love stays, even if the details don't. We don't talk enough about that. About how memory can become something active, not just passive. Something you create, not just something that happens to you. In every culture around the world, rituals exist to honor the dead. Not to forget them, but to keep them present. To give grief a home. To make memory something sacred, instead of something we push down. In Japan, families participate in the Obon Festival, lighting lanterns to guide the spirits of their ancestors home. In Mexico, Dia de los Muertos transforms grief into a vibrant celebration, with ofrendas, altars filled with photos, food, and mementos. In Ghana, funerals are elaborate, multi-day ceremonies that honor the dead with music, dance, and storytelling. These traditions aren't about closure. They're about connection. You can do that too. I remember one woman I worked with who lost her mother just before the birth of her first child. Every year on her mother's birthday, she bakes the same apple pie they used to make together. And she does it with her daughter now. It's not loud or elaborate, but it's theirs. A soft moment of presence in the absence. Another woman shared that after losing her teenage brother, she began leaving little notes around the house with his favorite sayings. On mirrors, in drawers, inside her wallet. It makes him feel close, she told me. Like he's still part of the everyday. Right where he belonged. These are not grand gestures, but they are sacred ones. Maybe it's lighting a candle on their birthday. Maybe it's planting a tree. Maybe it's a shelf in your home with their photo and a few pieces of who they were. Maybe it's telling their story out loud, again and again, until it becomes less like breaking and more like breathing. You don't have to do anything grand, but you do get to decide, what do I want to carry forward? Some people start legacy projects. They write books, raise money, run races, tattoo their skin, and speak their loved ones' names in rooms that never met them. Some just whisper a name before sleep, or keep a voicemail, or wear a sweater they left behind. There is no right way to remember. There is only your way. But remember this, building a legacy isn't about turning pain into productivity. It's about giving love a direction, and that direction can be soft, quiet, slow, personal. You get to keep them, not in the old way, but in a way that lets both of you keep going. This isn't about forgetting. This is about choosing how to remember. Reflective practice. What do I want to carry forward? Is there a ritual I want to create to honor their memory? What legacy, big or small, would feel meaningful to me? Let go of the pressure to move on. Move forward instead, holding your memory in one hand and your own becoming in the other. Chapter 12. You get to carry this differently now. Grief doesn't leave, it weaves into your breath, your days, your decisions. The goal is not to fix it, but to find a way to carry it without collapsing. Unknown. We began with the rawness, the rupture, the scream inside the silence. And now, we're here, at the place where grief is no longer just an emergency. It's become something else, not lighter, not smaller, but different. This chapter is not about resolution, not about happy endings. You don't get over it. You don't outrun it. But you do learn to walk with it in a new way. This is the chapter about integration. In modern trauma psychology, including internal family systems, the polyvagal theory, and Janina Fisher's parts work, Grief is no longer treated as something to overcome, but as something to integrate. These approaches recognize that pain doesn't vanish. It finds a place. Healing means learning to live alongside the wounded parts, not silencing them. And when you do, those parts become less reactive, less raw. They begin to trust the safety you've built around them. Integration means your grief no longer has to sit in the dark. It gets a seat at the table now. Maybe not the whole table. Maybe it's just the quiet corner. But it belongs. Living with grief doesn't mean constant sadness. It means living with a new layer, like sediment, like scar tissue. Not gone, not gaping. Just part of you. In Western culture, we often confuse healing with erasure. We think if the tears stop, the grief is gone. If you laugh again, it must mean you're over it. But healing isn't a return. It's an evolution. And grief, when integrated, becomes a quiet compass. You might still cry at inopportune moments. You might still avoid certain songs or shows. You might still whisper their name when no one is listening. That doesn't mean you're stuck. It means you're honest. Integration isn't clean. It's not linear. Some days it looks like peace. Other days it's like an ache. But on all days, it means you're still showing up. Here's the truth I want to leave you with. You can be okay and grieving at the same time. You can build a beautiful life with a bruise at the center. You can carry joy in one hand and longing in the other. And you don't have to choose. Sometimes we think grief is the heavy suitcase we're doomed to drag forever. But what if it's more like a thread, woven into everything, not weighing us down, but holding parts of us together? You don't carry it the same way you did at the beginning, and that's the point. It changes because you change. You get to decide how it moves with you now, whether it's through rituals, silence, storytelling, or stillness. You get to make room. This isn't a closing chapter. It's a folding in. Grief becomes part of your wholeness, not the thing that broke you. And if that's not healing, I don't know what is. Final reflective practice. Describe your new relationship with your grief on one page. If grief were a person, a place, or an object, what would she be now? What does she look like, feel like, sound like today? Not then, but now. Who is she now? How do you move together? Where do you still struggle? What have you learned to carry well? And what would it mean to carry it all? Differently, but still yours. Case stories. Here's how some of the women I've worked with describe their new relationship with grief. When I came to the retreat, I thought I had to be better by now. But during one of the group exercises, I finally said her name out loud. For the first time in months. And I didn't break. I exhaled. Now I write her name in the margins of my journal, and it feels like prayer. Paulina, grieving the loss of her daughter at birth. It's like she walks beside me now, not in front of me. I don't follow her anymore. Sometimes she taps my shoulder, but most days she just lets me be. Marta, who lost her sister 3 years ago. At first, I tried to silence the grief. Now I make her tea. I sit with her like I would with an old friend who's seen too much. We don't talk much, but she's always welcome. Elena, mother to a stillborn son. For years my grief was a storm. Now she's a garden. Wild, unpredictable, sometimes messy, but mine, and still full of life. Zoe, after the loss of her partner. Thank you for reading, for staying, for being brave enough to meet your grief with open eyes. Afterward. Say it out loud, even if your voice shakes. Your story is your power. Speak it, especially when it trembles. Inspired by the voices of women who refuse to grieve quietly. When we opened this book, I made you a promise that your grief didn't need to whisper, shrink, or apologize for itself, that it could be loud, raw, real, that you could be. And chapter by chapter, we've walked that path together. We began in the wilderness, the rupture, the numbness, the disbelief. At first, grief was a scream you couldn't name. You were surviving hour by hour, with no map and no language. In the early chapters, we made space for the shock, the silence, the unbearable. We asked nothing of you except to stay. Then came the naming: rage, guilt, fear, longing. We explored them gently, truthfully. You wrote your way through them and met them on the page without needing to fix them. You learned that feeling isn't failing. Later, we walked through identity and memory. Who are you now? Who are you without them? How do you honor what was and survive what is? These weren't questions with answers, but with invitations. To ritual, to rest, to self-compassion. And now, we're here. The space where grief is no longer just an emergency, but a companion. Still heavy, but not strangling. Still tender, but not wild. Something you carry differently. This book never promised neat endings, but it did promise honesty, and space, and tools you could reach for on the hard days. You've earned every page you've turned, every pause you've taken, every truth you've told yourself, even the shaky ones. So say it out loud, even if your voice shakes. I'm still here. That's the anthem now. Not healed, not over it, but still here. Awake, wounded, wiser. And yours. Let your grief evolve. Let your story unfold. Let your tenderness be loud. This isn't goodbye. It's you, becoming. And that is more than enough. This isn't goodbye. It's a beginning. Just one that looks and sounds like you. Thank you for listening to the audio version of Grief is Loud. If you haven't yet, I encourage you to get the full workbook. It's where you'll find the complete set of tools to support your healing journey. The book goes beyond listening. It invites you to engage, reflect, and rebuild with intention. And don't miss. Bonus, additional chapter. Grief Out Loud, your self-check-in, a fiercely gentle tool to reconnect with yourself, even when the world feels unrecognizable. This isn't just a checklist. It's a powerful self-honesty practice designed to help you stay grounded, clear, and human in the chaos. Quick, raw, transformational. Use it when you don't know what you need, only that something has to shift. Buy the book if you haven't already. Your next breath of clarity is waiting. Before you go, a small big thing. If Grief is Loud spoke to you, even just a little, if it made you feel seen, less alone, or simply understood, I'd be deeply grateful if you could share a few honest words. Your words matter. Your review doesn't just support this book. It helps someone else, standing where you once stood, choose their lifeline. Go to Books page on Amazon. You'll find the link below this video. Leave a short review. It's quick. It's powerful. It could be the reason someone finds what they need. Thank you for being part of this. Thank you for being here. About the author, Clara Winford. She doesn't teach people how to move on. She walks beside those learning to live with what they never asked for. As a trauma-informed coach and group facilitator, she's spent over a decade supporting thousands of grieving people, women and men, in hospital rooms, community circles, private sessions, and quiet, unfiltered moments of breaking. Her gift is holding space where grief doesn't have to perform, fix itself, or be made smaller. What makes her work different isn't just her training. It's her willingness to witness your pain without turning away. Grief is Loud is her invitation to stop pretending and begin healing. Not perfectly, but honestly.